Welcome everyone to this webinar to the Center of Mexican Studies. We want to start with some land acknowledgements. The Center for Mexican Studies at UCLA acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tonga people. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to be with students, with faculty. We are in for a great treat. We have a special guest, Ingrid Kummels, who's a professor emerita of cultural and social anthropology at the Institute of Latin American Studies at Freie University in Berlin. She is the author of another book, Transborder Media Spaces, Ayuujk video making between Mexico and the United States. But today she's going to present to us a book, hot off the press, Indigeneity in real time. It just came out early this month. So we're gonna pass around some flyers. You have some flyers ready. Yeah. So it's hot on the press. And this book is titled Indigeneity in Real Time, the Digital Making of Oaxacalifornia. I'm very excited to be hosting Ingrid because I've known her since she started doing the field work for the previous book and this present book. So it's been really exciting to see how she's been engaging with, in a transnational way. This is a multi-sided ethnography, given the fact that she's documented the lives of a transnational community. She had to also travel through the entire transnational circuit. So it's very interesting also the documenting how the sense of identity and belonging is kept perpetuated among people from the diaspora, and especially the cases of Ayuujk people, Mijes, and Zapotecs in Los Angeles. So she's been doing long-term field work in Oaxaca with this, in these two regions. So this is the product of a lot of work and a lot of interesting conversations. And by the way, we have one of the protagonists here.
Yeah, that's very important. So Elizabeth Eslava, or Liz, I think she just shortly went out, but
yeah, here she is. In the back.
So she's in the back and she's busy exactly with the theme of the book, that is communication. And through her media work, Oaxacalifornia is digitally made. Yeah. She's from a community, from a Zapotec community, so everything that she live streams is something that the community will be able to see.
So welcome Liz too, as a protagonist of this story. So she's gonna be documenting this event actually to make it available to the indigenous Zapotec and Ayuujk community here in Los Angeles. So without further ado, please help me welcome Ingrid Kummels, who's going to present her book. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Gaspar, for this introduction. And I feel so honored to be here among you, because I know there are several people from the different communities. One must say there is not a homogeneous Latino community. This is a mistake often made. There is a great diversity of different languages, different cultures, approaches, and of course, differences of gender and social status, occupation, etc. So we have here quite a panorama. And my book, Indigeneity in Real Time, which you already saw on the screen, but here it is physically. I'm very glad it came out. And it's important for me first to introduce it, present it, to the community themselves. So I come from Mexico. I was in Yalalac 10 days during the Easter ceremonies. And the book is in English. And of course, it's at the moment not very accessible due to language to the people who helped me, who collaborated in this investigation. But I have concrete plans to bring it out in Spanish in 1 year. That takes approximately a year. I have this experience with the other book, and that was possible. And a friend in Yalalac, Manolo Ortiz, even offered to translate one chapter into Zapotec. And this would be novel, and I'm very glad for the idea they gave me in Yalalac to also bring out a chapter in Zapotec. Normally the written Zapotec materials are about, of course, their own knowledges there. There are a lot of written materials, but it would be sort of new that somebody from externally, with my perspective as a Cuban, a German anthropologist, would be translated into Zapotec. So what's this book about? It's about Zapotec and also Ayuujk, or Mije people from two communities, Yalalac and Tamazulapan, living in the Oaxaca and Sierra Norte, how they launched cutting edge media. And by way of these media, that's cell phone reporting, but it's also managing websites. It's about internet radios. It's about multimedia platforms. And it's also about traditional videography with video cameras and pressing or publishing that on DVDs. And all this media scene is basically to be able to combine a transnational lifeway, but also a communitarian lifeway between Mexico and the US. And this is done under very difficult circumstances. A restrictive border, of which we know about for a long time since the Bracero program ceased, but even the Bracero program, which was to recruit farmhands, was basically targeted to men and not to women. So this border has been restrictive for very many decades. And my investigation was precisely during the Trump years, which was particularly intense because for the first time officially, US government would give racist reasons even for deporting migrants, and this was very hard. So I'd like to open here some images with relation to what I'm presenting. Let's see. Yeah, so that's working. And this is basically the points I want to deal with: Pioneer Oaxacan videos and real time and Comunalidad and the American dream and transnational death. And let's see. Just want to go to the next foil. Ah, yeah. I think it's here. Aha, okay. So I sort of grasped the importance of these media practices, which are self-determined, are autonomous, from different places in this uneven transnational terrain between Mexico and the United States. So I traveled a lot, as Gaspar mentioned. I was in Yalalac, I was in Tamazulapan, I was in Los Angeles. So the past years, sometimes they ask me in Germany, when are you at home? And I couldn't really identify what is home. It wasn't one home, it was already several homes. And every time I traveled to the Sierra Norte, often I would go to one event to another. So there are patron saint festivities going on. There are quite many. One can practically visit one every weekend because the many municipalities in Oaxaca, there are 570. In the Sierra Norte, there are 68. And also their sectors or agencias, they also celebrate such festivities. And every time I would come to such an event, I would see not only one videographer documenting, but 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. For example, in Yalalac, I was lucky, and when I went there for the first time in 2015, a marriage was going on. And they told me, oh, you're invited spontaneously, which is this generosity which one often experiences in the Sierra Norte. And they say, oh, there are festivities going on at the bride's house, but also at the groom's house. And I noticed in each house there was a videographer documenting everything for hours, because not only family live in Yalalac, but they also live in Los Angeles. And to be able to communicate, I call it also in my book digital kinning, because it's creating kin through digital means, then people on both sides of the border have been very inventive. These restrictions do not apply only to US politics, but for example, the Mexican government for many decades did not supply the rural regions where indigenous people mostly live. They also live in urban regions, but these rural regions were not supplied in a correct way with digital facilities and connectivity. So all this about communicating is a great challenge, and innovative media makers sometimes combine making video with handing them over to people who will connect them or upload them on platforms. And that was precisely what was done in 2015 already at this marriage. So that was why documentation was so important. And as for the patron saint festivities, I talked with the media makers, and they said, oh, they would publish or make more than 300 or 400 DVD copies to be able to send them to Los Angeles. And they would send them also with autonomously organized paqueterias, with parcel services organized by Yalaltec people or by Ayuujk and Miche people, and send them to Los Angeles. And here they had distributors that would offer by phone or from door to door a copy of the latest patron saint festivity. And this is not only something very emotional and effective to see one's hometown, but people here in Los Angeles also contribute financially to the festivities of their hometown. So if they donated something like a trophy, for example, for a basketball game, or food or beverages for a certain element of the festivity, they were able to see this on video. And they would get the feedback because in their community, they are always thanked for their contributions. So I noticed that all this media making activity is very important. Steve Vertovich once called it the social glue of transnationalism when cheap phone calls had become accessible. And I noticed that this media scene is much more wider, and that in 2015 videos was what I called fiesta videos. I also noticed that there are different genres. Of course, depending on the festivity, on the celebration, there are also quinceañera videos for the celebration of the 15th birthday coming of age of a young woman or girl. And tequio, or community labor videos, was one of the first genre that was created. And this is very interesting because reciprocity was organized transnationally already in the 1970s, and in the 1980s, video was used instead of so-called Gosona books. The Gosona booklets are like annotations of who helped me and to whom do I owe help in the future. And instead of that, video was used to sort of document every person who was present at a communal work, because then it was the evidence that this person need to be reciprocated in the future. So I noticed this function of video, and that is also what my interlocutors told me. So I am very grateful to people, videographers like Pancho Limeta, and also Leonardo Avalos Bis, and many others that I cannot mention here, but whose names all appear in my book. And at the same time, all this was part of an integral part of communitarian lifestyles that were in movement, were in the process. And here another, a few images to see that media making has a whole dimension, like here, a whole dimension of transnationalism is made visible through videos. It has to do that there are stores or also marketplaces, stands in the Sierra Norte, and there used to be such stands in Los Angeles. And also I even found one in New York, for example, for videos from Michoacan. So I sort of see them everywhere. You know? They are perhaps not so visible to other people, but there are places where you can acquire these videos. And of course, the people of the communities know that. But I noticed that even though they are very conscious of their media making, they sometimes don't give it that importance. No, it's because other people might belittle it and say, "Oh, they're just recording for hours and hours." No, and they don't see that there is a lot of aesthetic design in all this, because they record in certain ways, and because this all has certain formats, and because it has certain genres. Then, of course, in certain places themselves, one can see how video is produced. And for example, here you see an image of a reunion, a typical backyard political reunion of a comisión. And they are discussing, that was in 2016, they had just constituted themselves. I'll come back to this, and perhaps Liz will say something about the Comitiva del Panteón, because they collected money to renovate the graveyard of their hometown Yalalac. So one can see that here a projector and audio, etc., is set up in a backyard. So all this is improvised, but at the same time, it's done in a very professional way to be able to communicate. And in that reunion, the Presidente Municipal was hooked up to the reunion and practically thanked his fellow people for all their work. And at the same time, very concrete organizational issues were discussed. Who is going to do the work of renovation in Yalalac? How do we transfer the money that has been collected in Los Angeles, and who keeps a record about this money? So very many things are discussed here. And then you also see at an event an internet radio, Radio Cantautor, La Voz de Nuestros Pueblos, which is one of a whole series of internet radios which I got to know starting in 2016. They started around this point. Radio making was already before that popular, the communities, but the possibility of integrating them on a Facebook page became something new and was sort of a new dimension of communication, because on a Facebook page, you can see, of course, the followers, you can also connect to them. So internet radio is sort of a bit more or different than traditional radio, because you have a high level of interconnectivity. And these internet radios became very popular, and not only their managers, in this case, a man from Sogocho, Adrián Beltrán, but also their presenters or broadcasters like Leti La Marquesa, Veronica, and many others from the communities, sometimes 1.5 generations, so that they came from Mexico at ages where they did not get to know their community too well, because already their parents were migrants that lived, for example, in Oaxaca City. But through radio making, they sort of intensified their relationship to Zapotec or to Ayuujk and Mixe culture, which I think is very interesting too. Because due to displacement and migration, we have like trajectories where sometimes people who migrated to Los Angeles, their previous experience is in Oaxaca City or Mexico City. And they know many things of their hometown's community, let's say indirectly through their parents, but also a lot through media making and the necessities to give a message to their community and to build community. So I think even community is built in many places, and even with much impetus, no, in Los Angeles, Oaxaca City, and also Mexico City. But of course, always with a reconnection to the hometown And there is where media comes in, for example, for people who are unauthorized, illegalized, and sort of how do they connect to their hometown, and how do they inform themselves about hometown culture. I mentioned, yeah, these internet stations, Radio Cantautor, Super Antequera, Radio HD, there are several others. They have reporters here in Los Angeles, but also in other US cities. I concentrated on Los Angeles, but the migrant communities are very large. And by logging into any of those internet pages, you can navigate a whole torrent of interconnected Facebook pages. So something like a virtual Oaxaca, appears, you know, through all these interconnections and I identified clusters. They are not separated by ethnicity, but of course language plays a role. So you do have like a Sierra Zapotec cluster, and you do have like an Ayuujk cluster with multimedia platforms like Tamix Multimedios or Multimedios Penen or ARTV. And these latter are, for example, they are not always based in Los Angeles. They are also based in Mexico, in the communities themselves. So here we have this scene, and we also have people like Elizabeth, that I call community influencers. Why call them community influencers? I do not mean influencer in the sense that they are doing some kind of commercial work, not at all, but they do influence in relation to community ideals, to cultural expressions. And they invest a lot of their time in individually managing their own Facebook page, live streaming. So they are constantly, and Liz, the time in the Uber that we just took or the bus, she will use to actualize her Facebook page. So she uses spare time whenever she can to do that. And there are several, and all of them seek to give expression to communal dances, for example, to brass bands, to fiestas, and on the whole to a Zapotec way of life, or Los Zapoteco. All this in Oaxaca is called Comunalidad. Comunalidad has a history of intellectuals of the Sierra Norte. Jaime Martinez Luna and Floriberto Diaz coined this term. They were both studied in Mexico City anthropology, but were discontent with the community studies of anthropologists that were external to the communities. So they sort of reworked both ideas from their communities as well as anthropological ideas. And Comunalidad makes reference to a communitarian lifeway in the villages that was basically also intensified as resistance to colonial domination. So communal work is very important, participating in this, doing it regularly, that it can be evidenced by the whole community, and one's own judicial system, and also an autonomy of a self-government, a political system that commonly in Mexico often is called usos y costumbres, but the right term is sistema interno normativo. So Comunalidad is all about that. And it is also practiced and very vibrant in these Los Angeles backyards. So one has a reworking of Comunalidad in an urban context, and that is not an easy task. And media partake into this task. And here I have cited somebody on the page of the multimedia page of Tamix Multimedios. And she is a migrant that I have noticed from other of her comments, probably wasn't in Tamazulapan for 20 years or so. And she thanks the administrator of the page publicly and says, "Thank you, my friend, for this transmission." Excuse me. It allows me not to miss the events. I mean, not just the fiesta, but the climate, the people, everything. So I feel as if I were there, even though I'm far away. She's living in the United States. And refers a bit to real time or to live transmissions. And I would like to add something to that. Why is live streaming so important? Videos, of course, had always a delay. They were recorded, and through paquetería, perhaps it took a month till people would see that. But live transmission allows a community of viewers to experience something at the same time, practically same time, or a very similar time, the same day. And this exchange of experience, as we know from viewing television series, I mean, in my youth, it was very common to comment these series the next day at school or things like that. But the more rapidly you can comment on that, the more you experience and feel something in common, a sense of collective belonging. So this challenge of organizing a transmission in real time is important to create community. And community influencers like this dedicate a lot of time to this and effort, so it will be possible that people communicate at the same time. Okay, I'll just drink a bit of water. I think it's the rather cool Los Angeles weather that influences my voice. And real time also has something metaphorical in my view, because being of the present is something that was denied to indigenous people for a long time. You are often thought as something of the past. They are related to archaeological findings, of which the Mexican nation, for example, is very proud of. But often this is the dimension of indigeneity that is emphasized, and being of the present and the future is not that emphasized. So I see these intensified efforts, to communicate in real time, and also to transmit this to a large public, because these Facebook pages have 10,000 and RTV, for example, about 200,000 followers and viewers, is also a demonstration of being firmly in the present and also projecting things to the future. For example, the images related to one's hometown, the Comitiva del Panteón, this renovation project that has already been carried out of the cemetery. The images of the cemetery in the hometown are important, to project how the hometown will look in the future, what further efforts can be organized for that. And also these large tournaments. Here is a photo of the Copa Mije, which is a large tournament similar to the Copa Juarez. It's not as large, but it is older, for example. It started already in the 60s. And so these images show a lot of the present of all that is made, and for a long time wasn't recognized. We know that López Obrador just recently was the first Mexican president to visit the Copa Juarez. Okay, you tell me with time, how am I going?
5 more minutes.
Okay. Then it's very important to say something about the Zapotec and Ayuujk ways of communalidad in the American dream. These are two ideas, I would call them political ideas, that not often are mentioned together. They seem very different. Communitarian lifeways in the Sierra Norte on the one hand, and American dreams, which often have been rightly criticized as an illusion that through hard work and complying to the norms of the US, one would progress. But here I refer to communities who profess these ideas in Zapotec and Ayuujk ways. And for example, one challenge of Comunalidad is that it has to be, or people want to carry it through in a place where a capitalist market system dominates. So how reciprocate, how can reciprocity be like an important system in a capitalist urban community? And here, many Zapotec and Ayuujk people are important entrepreneurs that combine both. So they make a living from business, and at the same time, they will never forget a communitarian side of their business, because they will always also invest into community practices. Many people lend their houses, lend their backyards. They do not charge for this. They also contribute to the fiestas in Los Angeles called kermeses, and they will not charge for this. And at the same time, they will also carry out their market-oriented business. So I see this as a way of adapting communitarian means to an urban capitalist context. And the American dream is something that many people mention, although scholars criticize it a lot. But it is like the attraction that, the pull attraction next to displacement from Mexico, because agriculture has not been supported for a long time by the Mexican government. But at the same time, there is a pull factor of the American dream, because the United States is a professed migrant country. We know that it has done it in very unequal ways, that some migrants have been attracted and others denied. But this myth continues. And at the same time, Zapotec and Ayuujk people have converted it, and one can see it in their media work. In their media work is a lot of geared towards the future. And a part of this future is that they also have settled down in, for sure, in the United States and in cities. And this is also something that is made visible through autonomous media, because there is still like a stereotype that indigenous people would only live in rural communities. So this whole media scene is enormously important for the visibility of a dimension of indigenous lifeways that has become even dominant in the media. Okay, so this is only a short overview about the chapters of my book, so you can have an idea, and I'll hand one to all to see. And I have not talked a lot about transnational death, and here I would like to ask Liz, who is from the Comitiva del Panteón, to say something about that. So Liz, if you like, just comment a few minutes. We have the time a bit short. That will be wonderful.
Sí. Perdón, tengo conmigo.
Ajá, como gustas en español, no puedes.
Sí, voy a hablar español porque mi inglés no está muy bien. Ok, buenos días a todos, buenas tardes. Yo soy una de la que está en la portada, me llamo Liz Eslava. Y de la que está hablando la señora Ingrid, del Comitiva Panteón, Proyecto Panteón. Eso lo organizamos hace más de 6 años. 6 años por ahí, pero lo hicimos por 5 años. Que nuestro pueblo es un pueblo no muy grande, pero tampoco muy chiquito, más o menos. Pero siempre mis paisanos siempre hacían otros eventos para el pueblo, pero nadie pensaba en el Proyecto Panteón. Entonces, nadie pensaba en el Panteón, perdón. Entonces, nosotros nos reunimos como unos 15 personas. Entonces dijimos, pues todos necesitamos del Panteón. Entonces tenemos que hacerlo, ¿verdad? Hacer algo para hacerlo más grande el Panteón y hacer ¿cómo se llama? Poner barda alrededor, porque mucha gente entraba a hacer otros trabajos adentro del panteón, como hacen allá en cualquier lugar, ¿no? Entonces, así fue que empezamos a hacer ese trabajo y pues hicimos varios eventos, varios kermeses, varios ventas de tamales. Así reunimos el dinero y metimos ahí como mucho dinero para hacer eso, pero también trabajamos mucho para eso. Y gracias a mis compañeros, los que están allá, entonces son los que nos apoyamos y hasta ahorita hicimos como una familia, estamos reunidos. Porque ya terminamos el proyecto, gracias a Dios ya terminamos el proyecto. Sí. Y así, ¿cómo se llama? Y ahorita es como le estaba contando, o sea, a usted o a él, que hicimos un evento aquel día. Somos los mismos del proyecto Panteón, pero quedamos como familia y así hicimos un evento para una de nuestras compañeras porque desgraciadamente le tocó la enfermedad del cáncer. Y así eso es lo que hicimos este domingo pasado. Pero del proyecto Panteón, gracias a Dios ya terminamos en eso. Lo hicimos el proyecto, cada etapa pues lo hicimos por 5 años. 5 años. Fue muy duro el trabajo, pero lo logramos, sí.
Sí, muchas gracias, Liz. And perhaps I'll just mention also this, of course, recording here on the photo, and that parallel wakes are organized. For example, if somebody dies in Yalalac, also a wake will be celebrated in Los Angeles. And this also creates community, and it is also live streamed. Here it was still recorded all on video. This is still done to have the hours, the length of the prayers, etc. But today it has become common that not only one wake, different wakes in different places, because families are transnational and media are necessary to transmit what and see what happened in the other place. So that is basically about what the book is.
Thank you, Ingrid. And why don't we start a dialogue? Let's open it up for questions. First, let's start here in this room. If you have any questions, please let me know. And then we'll go with folks online. Is there anyone here who has a question, who have comments? Go ahead, Dylan.
Thank you so much for your presentation. One of my questions, I think you spoke about Tequio, you spoke about the participation in the fiestas and so forth, but I'm really curious because in a lot of Oaxacan communities that are using sistemas normativos internos, like, do you see at all this use of the digital medium for participation in assemblies? Because I mean, because the assembly is the sort of maximum authority in a lot of communities, like, is there an incorporation and is there a transnational aspect in the communal assembly?
Well, thank you very much for that question. That is essential. My book also talks about that there are differences between the hometowns and what I call satellite communities of migrants, for example, here in Los Angeles. And they do not always agree on political issues. Right. And I think it's due to that there's not an intense live streaming of the Asamblea, of these general assemblies. I know in the case of Tamazulapan that until the moment authorities have not wanted even people to use cell phones at assemblies. But interestingly, what happened with Tamazulapan for some time, it's not going on now because of the controversies. There was like a virtual General Assembly, and that was controversial. In my view, that has to do with the uneven transnational terrain. Transnationalism is not really something that the national governments want. I mean, the Mexican government, even if it's now even more, supports migrant population and has done that for decades, but it always has been restricted. It took some time until they could vote in Mexico, and it took some time until this migrant system of supporting their hometowns was also supported financially by the Mexican governments. So I see some reserve, on the part of the governments. And also this is reflected in the communities themselves. So they do not always agree. And I think this is a delicate point of the General Assembly. And for example, Tamasulapan, this is, I think, the interesting part of comparing communities. And Yalala organized this in completely different ways. In Tamasulapan, you remain a community member even if you're in the US. But this also is an obligation to really go back to Tamasulapan if you're elected, and you're mostly elected every 6 years, to be an authority for 1 year. And people here, Ayuuk people, then have to decide, do I go back or do I give an important financial contribution, which is about 100,000 pesos or $5,000 to compensate for not being present. In Yalala, instead, they say, oh, people who went to the United States have nothing to do. They are not part of the community officially. But migrants didn't care that much for this policy and have made their parallel commissions, and they are recognized by the General Assembly in Yalala. But they are not obligated to come back, let's say, every 3 years or something like that. So we see the communities have looked for different solutions. Gaspar is a pioneer who has written an article on that. And interestingly, it is interesting to see how this has developed, and the media play a role there in restricting them or allowing them, allowing something like a virtual political assembly, or allowing for platforms where these affairs are discussed, and they are discussed at the Facebooks of the Comisiones of Yalala, for example. Once they did not get a permission, or this was pending to get a permission from the General Assembly to be able to collect funds here. And this is, of course, vividly discussed through the Facebook pages.
Thank you. There's another question here. Go ahead.
Sí, bueno, que también mi pregunta que tengo un poco para Luis, y de pronto también sobre, usted mencionó que este proyecto del Panteón del colectivo.
Proyecto Patio.
Fue como algo que...
Sí, puede ser un poquito más alto.
A ver, un poco más alto, sí, en lo que usted se involucró. Hace 5 años, tengo curiosidad como si ese fue como el proyecto que a usted la inspiró a coger su celular y participar de esa manera, documentando los espacios y sí, como haciendo esta conexión a través de la virtualidad, ¿no? Si de pronto fue ese proyecto lo que la llevó ahí, o como a usted y de pronto otros ejemplos, si usted conoce dentro de la comunidad, ¿cómo se llega a decir, vamos a utilizar esto? Y esa pregunta viene...
¿Cómo empezamos con eso?
Sí, más que este proyecto, sí, como la idea de documentar y de hacer sonidos en vivo y de todo esto. Tengo curiosidad también, si de pronto en la investigación de Ingrid haya también como una línea de tiempo, porque digamos que estaba mencionando que actualmente es controversial pensar en una asamblea general que utilice y trascienda fronteras a través de la virtualidad. Me pregunto, si miramos hacia atrás, como en qué momento pasó a ser algo que se pudo concebir o pensar que podemos hacer esto, ¿no? Entonces, no sé si de pronto dentro de esa investigación haya una relación a eso del tiempo de cuando, cómo se empezó a vivir esto y si su experiencia de vida tiene conocimiento.
Nosotros cuando empezamos eso, no pensábamos meter la barda en el panteón, porque fue uno de mis compañeros, fue a Yalala. Entonces, llegó en el panteón y vio el presidente del municipio. Entonces estaban limpiando en ese lugar del panteón, pero el panteón ya está muy mal, ya se mira. Ajá. Entonces dijeron, ¿por qué no sembramos árboles? Árboles, flores, para que se vea, sí es cierto que es un panteón, ¿verdad? Pero podemos poner árboles, flores para que se vea un poco diferente. Entonces, para que dé un poco de luz adentro, ¿no? Entonces, cuando regresó uno de nuestros compañeros, entonces nos habló por teléfono, nos dijo, Liz, si me puedes acompañar en esto, puedes estar con nosotros en esto. Y yo inmediatamente, porque a mí me gusta apoyar, y a mi comunidad. Entonces yo le dije, sí, claro, más dime cuándo y nos reunimos para hablar sobre eso. Y cuando llegamos, y estaban, sí llegaron como unos 15 personas o 20 personas llegaron, pero no todos estuvieron de acuerdo y salieron. Y ya nos quedamos como unos 14, 15 quedamos. Y ya estamos según para comprar los árboles, flores para sembrar ahí. Pero ya cuando nos hablaron de la autoridad, nos habló, dijo, no, pues eso tiene que esperar, mejor vamos a meter todo y hacer más lugar, porque mucha gente de aquí de California se muere, mis paisanos, y los mandan para Yalala, porque quieren estar en su tierra. Y también de México, de la Ciudad de México, de la Ciudad de Oaxaca, de otros estados que son de Yalala y quieren irse allá para enterrarse. Entonces queremos más tierra ahí. Así fue que dijo la autoridad si pueden hacernos el favor de trabajar y ahora sí que meternos más máquina para tener más tierra, para hacer más ancho el panteón. Y así formamos el grupo y dijeron quién está de acuerdo y quién no. Pues los que no estaban de acuerdo ya salieron y los que nosotros quedamos como unos 14, 15. Pues. Y quedamos ahorita como unos 8 por ahí. Estamos ahorita. Sí, estamos fuertes ahí y así quedamos y hicimos el trabajo. Y como siempre hay personas que no están de acuerdo, pero lo importante es de que se hizo y ahorita ya se está llenando otra vez. Porque por la pandemia se fueron muchos ahí.
No pueden ir para abajo. Piso.
No, se amplió. No, yo quería que hiciera todos para abajo para que haya más lugar, pero...
Well, the book looks into this process from 2016 when practically this commission was created, and it was novel because other commissions are more organized through barrios of Yalalac. So that was quite interesting. It was organized in a different way and precisely with this project. And it looks into a sort of crisis in 2018 when there were controversies and a live hookup was organized with Radio Cantautor because an important part of disagreements is to have insight into what is the other side thinking about. And after that, it was solved little by little. And so there is no disagreement today, but this is part of the processes that the book looks into and how it is resolved through media, because there's no possibility of the whole commission traveling to Yalalac for different reasons, also for financial reasons. And how does one communicate in a way that trust is reestablished, you know? And also in all these financial things, which are quite important. Important funds are collected. They go into the 10 and 20,000 and more. And so know how to have trust that they are managed in the right way.
Okay. Before we continue with the questions, we're gonna pass around a QR code so you can give us your feedback about this. We wanna get your response to this type of presentation. So we're gonna use this in our report to the Department of Education. So hopefully we get your support to continue doing this work. Sarah, and then we'll go to the online questions. So go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm Sandy Harris with Multimedia Foundation. It's another diaspora migrante. Couple questions. Una pregunta. El proyecto de ustedes se envolvió algo del 3x1 o no trabajaron el 3x1?
No aceptamos el 3x1. No aceptamos porque todo lo que organizamos, todo lo que hicimos, lo hicimos con mucho esfuerzo y tratamos de sacar el dinero por medio de las ventas de comida, por medio de venta de tamales, por kermeses, por todo eso. Y al principio nuestros paisanos sí nos apoyaron mucho eso, el primer evento que hicimos, pero ya después de todo lo que hicimos, pero sí cooperaron muchos también, pero no todos, pero sí hicimos todo lo posible. Y 3x1 no metimos 3x1.
Okay,
Sí, todo lo hicimos por nuestro esfuerzo de hacer todos los
Yeah.
eventos.
If I may add something, 1-3-4-1 by one program failed in the Yalate case. There wasn't one intent, but it was not a fortunate intent. So people have been a bit reserved towards making another intent.
And my second question was for you, in your book, do you deal with the remesas?
I deal with it, but as the collecting of funds of these different organizations, and this dimension of remesas, and how the communities have basically supported themselves on work of the people of their own communities present in the hometown, as well as these remesas coming from different kind of collectivities. I mean, I don't always call them hometown associations, or very carefully, because they need this official recognition to be able to participate in 3x1 programa. And the comisiones de barrios do not auto-name themselves hometown associations. But sometimes I do use this as an investigator's term, so one can know that there are these kind of hometown associations which are rather informal. No, they don't have this formal recognition of participating in a 3-for-1 program.
Thank you.
Great. We're gonna go to some questions online that were posted in the question and answer space. Adriana Cruz Manjarres sends you her regards.
Oh,
She's
wonderful.
watching this from Mexico, I assume.
I'm very grateful to her help. Yeah.
And so Carol Brower asked if you could talk a little about the gender balance in the production and distribution of the videos.
Yeah. Also, this is a topic dealt with in the book, because first it was really male dominated, not completely, because I also interview, for example, Juana Vázquez, who was an early photographer of the Unión de Mujeres Yabaltecas. So she documented that by photography very early. But on the whole, this gender bias toward a male, for a long time, male-dominated videography and audiovisual production can be, in my view, explained by that membership to cultural expressions like banda music and dance was quite restricted for women. It seems to have been legitimized by sacredness and masculinity having been seen for a long time as a combination, something indispensable, and not had been attributed too much to women. I do not say that this is pre-colonial or something like that. No, I say for the 20th century, this idea dominated. So there were no female banda members until around 2001 or something, when the Uken band promoted female band members, and nowadays there are female band members in all bands. But for a long time, no, until 2000. And one chapter of my book deals precisely with Zapotec epistemologies online, and has to do with mediatizing Zapotec dances. And part of this movement has been that a community leader and influencer, Lisbelia, promoted with others the creation of an all-girl dance group who danced the dance of Los Negritos, renamed as La Danza de las Negritas. So one chapter deals with that, and initiative to change this gender balance, very directly. And this was promoted by first the band, the dance group. It was very important for them, their first appearance, that it was performed in Yalala, not so much in Los Angeles. It had to be in La Cuna de la Danza, the authenticity of dance is attributed to Yalala. And that was, of course, also a great debate, and was a media event that many of the dance mothers and also this dance group leader organized, so it would become publicly visible. It's part of a series of all-female dance groups that have performed in the Sierra Norte. So it's not the only initiative. There have been others in Xochistepec and Sogocho. That is, this gender balance is changing, and it's due to media makers' initiatives, to female media makers like Isvedia, Liz, and others, and also those contributing to the teams of internet radios. Many have created their own internet radios in the meantime. Radio Gobisha is, for example, an internet radio managed basically by women. So there is a change in these years.
Thank you. Now a question from the director of the Latin American Institute, who apologizes for not being here, Ruben Hernandez Leon, who asks, how has the rise of social media platforms impacted communication in media practices among members of Oaxacan communities in diaspora?
Yes, one part of it, which I have talked about, is a lot about communicating across the border. But here in Los Angeles itself, or in the hometown itself, it is important for archiving one's own history. So I also deal with media as archives. Facebook, one knows everything that is live streamed will be on chronological strings, can remain on one's platform. So these platforms have become important as community archives. So they are very much consulted, for example, to learn a danza, to be informed how, or just play the music. So much of these cultural expressions in the meantime, people do not rely only on the hometown or on the dance teacher, but really on their own community archives. So that's why I call them epistemologies online. That is, many people also, they do not only publish daily to publish current news, but also to have as much content as possible. So this idea of collecting content. And I also show that if anybody like me as an investigator, or Diego here from the Yalal Tech community who's studying at UCLA, if we're looking for something, we will probably look on these Facebook pages or on these multimedia platforms, because we won't find it in institutional archives. Which institutional archives the dance of Los Negritos from the Sierra Juarez? You won't find it. No, there are very few films. Fortunately, they exist. But to have a more complete picture, or also on, if you're interested, in this commission and which work did they do in precise years and what was the outcome of the work, you look into these Facebook platforms. They're of course only one perspective, but they allow you to make informed questions, while in any other archive or looking for books, you won't be able to find this information. And people are very conscious about that. They do these kind of consultations. And in my view, these archives should be very much supported by our universities and also by institutional archives. They still, I think, haven't taken that enough in account, that we have like archivists, local archivists everywhere. Because due also to our appropriation of technology, we have had to become archivists. No, we weren't that formally, and probably, okay, we used to save our photos in shoeboxes or something like that, or even put in an album. But nowadays, these dimensions of the information that we are storing alone on my USB stick or on a laptop, and in these cases, most of my interlocutors have a cell phone and don't have a laptop or even a tablet. So their cell phones are extremely valuable. And also to learn that you have to secure this material on another memory is something, or even a Facebook page will not last forever, and how to secure all this material. I think it's a very important dimension of community work.
Can I just do a follow-up?
Go ahead.
It's in a new kind of communicative digital form. It's not social media per se, but which seems in the last few years, during the pandemic, just exploded as podcasting, and it seems very appealing to younger generation. If you get to know it, the basic you could pretty much create a podcast and distribute it really quick, and it's you give you the opportunity to curate content, to kind of create a narrative story. So I wonder if podcasting has been something that it's been playing a role in the communities.
Yes, it has, but I mean, also these media makers are diverse. Let's say we have media makers that have organized courses or taken courses. There is also an influence from different institutions. For example, Ojo de Agua Comunicación in Oaxaca has programs, and also other institutions. And there are others that are more autodidactic and do things other ways. So podcasts, in my view, has been a format more of this, trained, let's say, with a certain formal training media makers. And they, for the Voz de Yalalag, which is the radio managed by the community, produces podcasts. It's about making podcasts in Zapotec language. So they use a blend of sounds and atmospheres and Zapotec language to create this image, this sonic image of what is being talked about.
Well, Sarah, go ahead, and then we're going to go to our last question on that. Go ahead, Sarah.
There's also the other side of the coin, because social media is incredible. You can Google or you search and find almost anything, unbelievable. But on the influencer or the people posting, there's that stress that you need to post. Sometimes I get friends tell me, you have posted in 2 days, and I'm saying, do I have to post? You gotta do it, But when I also look at organizations, it becomes a challenge that when you're looking for brands or something, part of what you have to answer is how many views you have, how many followers, how many this. So it has become a challenge of that to rise to that, okay? And it creates some stress from people that perhaps we don't want to feel obligated that we have to post.
Yes, well, I agree very much with that. And there, I think there's a lot to learn from these transnational communities, because up to the moment, there has been a lot of respect of people who do not connect because they either did not have the possibility, but they are also not willing to in the meantime. For example, the years about which I write, Yalalag did not have a community internet connection. It appeared only with the Internet para Todos program of the present López Obrador government. And also in the meantime, there's a Telcel. So there were very many people who would not connect, and others who lived in this atmosphere that you're describing, of a stress of having to post all the time. If not, people would think you're seriously ill, if you're not posting for 2 days. And somehow there was this idea, I have the impression, that anything goes, that this is also, for example, I do not have a Facebook page, which is extremely uncommon, but I particularly want to avoid this other medium where I am constantly pressed to respond and to present myself or present my doings. And so I think until the moment this has been respected very much. But of course, in the Los Angeles context, it is very difficult to avoid if you're doing community work. I think it's practically impossible not to have a Facebook page. And what I liked a lot is about the courses in Mexico, the media makers to which I talked there, for example, Eliel Cruz, is very conscious about the economy of likes, that it might press you to publish certain content, like funny content and other content not, etc. So information about that, I think, is extremely valuable. And there has been information between these different, I mean, the media makers really train themselves a lot along the lines of informing themselves. So if one visits the Ojo de Agua Comunicación course, you can be sure that this information will flow between all. And also Adrián Beltrán, which I interviewed in my book, he talks a lot about this challenge or this difficulty of the economy of likes, and curating a more independent content and a content that is community oriented and not one at a tremendous viewership, which you can perhaps monetize. So this information exists, it is flowing, people are discussing that too. And I think this there's much more necessity for exchange. So that's great to know about your experience and to be able to exchange that too.
We need to bring to a close the webinar. We have a last question from our colleague Brenda Nicolas at UC Irvine, who asked a question about access to technology. She's asking, how do you see technology access advancement for community participation among agencias municipales to that of municipios? I'm thinking of agencias, usually smaller pueblos that got access to phone lines, internet much later than the larger municipios such as Yalalac.
Yes. Well, it's good to point out this large difference. This is, in my view, part of this very uneven transnational terrain, and the reasons for these inequalities. And of course, it has to do with mega enterprises who are interested in numbers and focus on densely populated regions. But these less densely populated regions are extremely important for the whole living of our planet, for the whole conservation of our planet. If there weren't the agencias, if there weren't agriculture, then we could not exist anymore. And I think this as a political demand is very important. It is sometimes not seen, and this has contributed to this displacement, to people orienting themselves mainly to urban spaces where there are these facilities. So in the communities themselves, there is this conscious, the agencias, as I know them, for example, for Tamazulapan, which has 8 agencias, they are extremely important in the General Assemblies, but up to the moment, some haven't seen that as their main demand. I think it has to do with a rural lifestyle, and also with first not so good experiences with Facebook. No, Facebook also brings in sometimes controversies. In another community, I'm now a lot in Peru. It also had to do with, in the pandemics, children getting tablets for the first time and seeing pornographic content and things like that. So sometimes the communities think a lot about, do we want this and how fast do we want this? Yalalac took their time, quite some time, for welcoming connectivity, but have done it now. And I think in the agencias too, we will find these different stances toward connectivity.